Hi everyone, this is Rusty Harrison. Today I want to talk to you about great CFL quarterbacks of the past who particularly have affected me as a fan, players who are notable, and what all these players share is that they're Hall of Famers. And certainly, as a fan, there are many other quarterbacks I could have listed, but I wanted to limit the number of quarterbacks I talk about today because I don't want to talk for hours. I just want to give you a taste of the great quarterbacks who I've admired over the years. And in doing so, I'd like to hear from you in terms of your selections. So let's get started. First quarterback I want to discuss is a famous quarterback of the 1960s and 70s, Ron Lancaster. His career began in 1960. And he retired in 1978. He came to fame as a quarterback with the Ottawa Rough Riders in 1960, where he won the Grey Cup, splitting time with Russ Jackson. Lancaster also played defensive back in that era. And so eventually, Ottawa made the decision to go with Russ Jackson as the full-time starter. And Lancaster went to Saskatchewan. And along with George Reed, they formed one of the most productive backfields in the history of the CFL. In 1966, Lancaster won his second Grey Cup, this time as the starter, in a game against the Ottawa Rough Riders and his old partner, Russ Jackson. Lancaster set many records. It's ironic, actually, that he grew up in Pennsylvania, in the same area as Johnny Unitas. Because like Unitas, Ron Lancaster set many, many records. And for years was the CFL standard for yardage and touchdowns. And subsequent to his career ending in 1978, Lancaster became a very successful broadcaster and later coach. He was elected to the Canadian Football Hall of Fame in 1982. He has a special place in my heart because I got to meet him in the early 2000s. And it was a special occasion for me as someone who was covering the Tiger Cats. Got to meet him over a week and got to appreciate him and his take on the CFL. And he had a tremendous impact on me as a fan. So he has a special place. Secondly, I'd like to look at Tom Clements. Now, Tom Clements came to the CFL from Notre Dame, establishing himself as a rookie quarterback in 1975 with Ottawa, and becoming one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the league, along with Condredge Holloway in the late 70s with the Ottawa Rough Riders. In 1979, he was traded to Saskatchewan, where he briefly was the starting quarterback. But he was traded again, this time to Hamilton, and because of circumstances, he decided he was going to try for the Kansas City Chiefs roster in the NFL. At that time, the head coach of the Chiefs was Marv Levy, the former legendary coach in Montreal. But Tom only wound up the third-string quarterback for that one season he was in the NFL. And he decided to come back to the CFL, where Hamilton retained his rights in 1981. Now, growing up in Hamilton, by that stage, I was a teenager, and so Tom Clements was my quarterback as a fan, and I really got to like how he played the game. As a mobile quarterback, he was a rollout quarterback, was able to throw fantastically down the field when rolling out and on the move. And he became a fixture of the CFL. And certainly for me, it was one of those things where I fully expected Tom to be a Grey Cup winning quarterback with Hamilton, as he had been with Ottawa in the 70s. But alas, that didn't happen. And by 1983, there were many problems with the Tiger Cats, just in terms of consistency and just controversies all around, particularly having Harold Ballard as the owner. And eventually, Tom Clements was dealt to Winnipeg for Dieter Brock, another star quarterback. But for me, it was a sad time, because I thought that Tom Clements was the better quarterback of the two. And Tom was able to get his revenge in 1984, the following year, when Winnipeg was able to play Hamilton in the Grey Cup in Edmonton and just crushed Hamilton 48-10, as I recall. So that was an interesting time, because it was a bittersweet defeat for me. I was happy that Tom won the Grey Cup. It was just unfortunate that he wasn't able to do it with Hamilton. Tom played until 1987, and eventually he became a Hall of Famer, as had Lancaster. Lancaster was inducted in 1982, and Tom was inducted in 1994. So those two quarterbacks were major influences for me as a fan, as was Warren Moon. Now, Warren Moon is particularly special on this list because he's the only quarterback on the list who not only was elected to the Hall of Fame in Canada, but also in the United States. He played at Edmonton starting in 1978. He had been a college star with Washington. And after winning the Rose Bowl, he didn't see the same opportunities as one would expect being a Rose Bowl winning quarterback. this was still an era where black quarterbacks were not given the same opportunities as white ones. And Warren wanted to play. Warren wanted to start as a quarterback. And so he was determined to take the opportunity that the Edmonton Eskimos gave him. And he joined Edmonton in 1978. Tom Wilkinson was the established starter at that time, a longtime veteran of the league. And Warren started to ease into the lineup, and over time, they formed quite a tandem. And Warren won in his first year with Tom Wilkinson and the rest of the Eskimos. And in fact, that began a dynasty. And for 5 years, from 1978 to 1982, Edmonton won the first of 5 Grey Cups. And so by 1980, Warren Moon became the established starter and simply dominated the league. And you could tell that he was going to be a tremendous star. And even back then, I suspected that eventually he was going to make his way back to the NFL. And this is what happened. In 1983, he played his last year in the CFL. And the Houston Oilers came calling. And there were a number of other teams, including Seattle, that bid for his services. So eventually he signed with Houston, and he established himself as a major star, eventually being enshrined in Canton at the end of his career in 2001. So having seen him in both leagues, I can say that he was an amazing quarterback. Mobile, tremendous arm, and is very underestimated. And in part, I think it's because he never won a Super Bowl in the NFL. But Warren had an incredible career here in Canada, and he was certainly one of my favorites. And I'm glad that his legacy in Canada has been celebrated. Next, another quarterback who has become a famous broadcaster here in Canada on TSN, Matt Dunigan. Matt became a fixture with the Edmonton Eskimos back in the mid-'80s. And you could see very early in his career that he was going to become a star. He's one of the most competitive players I've ever seen. Certainly one of those quarterbacks that you could argue at his very best was an elite quarterback. He never got a shot to play in the NFL, but he was able, thanks to the CFL expansion into the United States, to actually play for the Birmingham Barracudas, his home team, in the early 90s. But he's most known for his Grey Cup victories in 1987 as the starter in Edmonton, although he missed the Grey Cup game, as I recall, due to injury. And in 1991, famously as the starter in Toronto, along with Rocket Ismail, the prolific wide receiver, and Pinball Clements, of course, Matt Dunigan was able to establish himself as a star throughout the league on many different teams. He's uniquely remembered for a particular game in 1994 where he threw for 713 yards in a game versus Edmonton in Winnipeg, setting the all-time professional single passing game record, and basically cementing his reputation as a big game quarterback. In 1995, subsequent to his return to Canada after the folding of the Birmingham team, he signed with Hamilton, and I was quite excited at that point because he was one of my favorite players, and I was very happy that he was able to come to Hamilton. But unfortunately, he got injured early in the season, suffering the last of many concussions that eventually forced him to retire early. But his legacy is one of a success. In 2006, he became a enshrinee in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. So again, Matt Dunigan is a great quarterback that I got the pleasure to watch. And his broadcasting career has also been prolific in Canada. Next is Danny McManus. I've talked about Danny on other podcasts, and he's a special player as someone who helped bring the last Grey Cup to Hamilton for the Ticats in 1999, I should say. He has a long tradition of being a clutch performer. He had 3 Grey Cup victories in 1990 as the backup in BC, but also in 1993 winning a crucial Grey Cup victory over Baltimore as the backup quarterback to Kent Austin. But Kent had been injured, and so Danny came in, and in the clutch, pulled the game out, and established himself as one of the great CFL playoff quarterbacks. Later on, he joined Ron Lancaster, who became the head coach of the Hamilton Ticats in 1998. And he was joined by Darren Flutie, his partner in crime in BC and in Edmonton, one of the great slot backs in history. And as a tandem, they helped turn the fortunes around of the Ticat team and established the Ticats as a power in the East at that time. After his career ended, Danny became a Hall of Fame inductee in 2011. So not only has he won 3 Grey Cups as a player, but also he has won 2, I believe, as an executive with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The next quarterback on my list is Doug Flutie. Now, Doug Flutie famously became a star in the USFL. And after the USFL folded, he became I wouldn't say a star, but certainly a notable quarterback in Chicago and then later in New England. Being on the short side, he was perceived as a quarterback who would never become a star, despite his pedigree with Boston College as a college star. And he basically came to Canada to reinvent himself, to reestablish his reputation as a big game quarterback. And joining the BC Lions in 1991, he did just that. In 1990, he signed with BC, but it was 1991 where he set a single season record as a passer with 6,619 yards passing, which is still a record today. In 1992, he joined Calgary and led them to a Grey Cup win and had many good years of success with Calgary. But then in 1995, he moved on to Toronto and became a two-time winner with Toronto in 95 and 96 before deciding to retry his luck in the NFL. And he signed with Buffalo and continued to have a very good career, not just with the Bills, but later on with the San Diego Chargers, and finally finishing his career with the New England Patriots. In 2008, Doug Flutie was elected to the Canadian Football Hall of Fame, and in a very special context, he was chosen the greatest player ever in a TSN fan poll and documentary series of the CFL's top 50 players. And many consider him to be the greatest quarterback to ever play in Canada. Like Warren Moon, his career in the CFL was relatively short, but anyone who got to see him can understand why he's considered one of the great quarterbacks of all time. And in my case, as a Hamilton fan, I got to experience the pain of watching him beat my Tiger Cats quite often in the 1990s. But I salute him. He was a very special player, as was his brother, Darren, the great slot back that I've referred to earlier with Danny McManus. And so Doug Flutie was a great quarterback to watch. So the final quarterback on my list that I want to discuss today is Anthony Calvillo. Now, Calvillo began his career in Las Vegas as a member of the Las Vegas Posse in 1994. And his rookie year was a very good one, with a team that was not that good, particularly with the offensive line. But he established himself as a young star. And from there, he went to Hamilton, where he had a few years on a team that was, quite frankly, really, really bad offensively. And despite having some really good games, Calvillo just had really bad luck a lot of turnovers. The offensive line, again, was terrible. And when Ron Lancaster took over as coach in 1998, Calvillo was moved to Montreal. Now, it was a real opportunity for Calvillo because Montreal had an established quarterback in Tracy Ham. And it gave Calvillo an opportunity to reset. And in many respects for me, his career is like that of Jim Plunkett in the NFL. As a Raider fan, Jim Plunkett was a quarterback who had tremendous upside potential, but because of circumstances, had many setbacks in his career, and eventually found himself in Oakland as the backup to Kenny Stabler. And so basically, like Jim Plunkett, Anthony Calvillo had to reestablish himself. And he got that chance in Montreal under the head coach, Charlie Taff. So playing behind Tracy Ham, he was able to get his bearings and get back to fundamentals and reestablish himself. And so by 2002, Calvillo became a key player in Montreal. And he won the first of 3 Grey Cups in Montreal. By the mid-2000s, Calvillo became the established starter in Montreal. And he set numerous records. He set records that surpassed that of Damon Allen for yardage and touchdowns. Over his career, he threw over 450 touchdowns, 455 to be exact, in the regular season. And so he established himself as one of the greats. And over time, of course, he had to fight a reputation of being someone who couldn't win the big game. And in 2009, 2010, in fact, he won back-to-back Grey Cups as a starter and certainly cemented his legacy as a star quarterback in the CFL. In 2017, Calvillo was inducted into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. He is now on the coaching staff of the Montreal Alouettes. These quarterbacks are particular examples of great quarterbacks that I have enjoyed as a fan. But I'd like to hear from you about your favorite CFL quarterbacks, because there are many to talk about, and I couldn't list all the ones that I liked over the years, but I'm sure that you have others as well. So feel free to like and subscribe and to comment on your favorites. And thank you for your time. And until next time, take care.